Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be reviewing Maula Jatt. I'm really excited to finally have seen the film and all the hype was totally worth it. I think it is a cinematic masterpiece and not just locally for Pakistan but also internationally. So the first two things that I want to discuss is the plot and the themes and tones that are used in the movie. The plot, I personally felt, was not as strong as it should have been, but that's keeping in mind that this is a remake of an old Punjabi movie which I think was released in the 1970s or 80s, if I'm not wrong. That movie itself was actually based on a novel by a Punjabi writer who actually wrote a novel about the Gandasa, which is the tool that Maula Jatt uses to slaughter his enemies. And that Gandasa then I think made into a 2 or 3 part novel on which at that time Maula Jatt and the previous series Something Gandasa was also based on. So the movie was an adaptation, the original movie was an adaptation of the novel, and then the current movie is an adaptation of the previous movie and a remake of sorts. So that is something that I found very interesting. It is particularly interesting to note that a lot of our culture, whether that's like folklore or culture in like villages, etc., that is something that is not really brought into mainstream cinema. And I think that keeping in mind that this is a very Punjabi movie with the Punjabi culture, which talks about 2 different tribes, the Nuts and the Jats, and then the other villages surrounding that particular terrain, I think it's fascinating to actually learn about our culture as Pakistanis and to have that revived in a new day and age. So one of the other things that needs to be discussed is the tone and the theme of the movie. The movie is essentially about 2 tribes and their rivalry and how, the Jatt child then avenges his family's deaths, which was the earlier part of the movie. I think the theme is mainly related to how tribes used to fight and sort of take over land or establish their dominance, which is something that is a very unique human experience to sort of mark their territory, etc., etc. And the tone of this particular movie, at least in the remake, I felt was very well done, because the way that the villains were sort of showcased, like yes, Maula Jatt is the hero and he will win the fight. This is something that we all know or are aware of. But the villains throughout the movie were sort of broken down into 4 to 5 segments. So it started off with the youngest son of the Nat clan, then it went on to build that the daughter was actually the villain, and then in the end we get to meet Noori Nath, who then becomes the rival or the equal rival of Maula Jatt. And I think it is fascinating that the villain or the antagonist in this movie was not just one person but a whole clan, and how the director or the script writers were able to masterfully showcase that. It is not something that I've seen in a lot of movies. Usually it's like bad guy, good guy does good things, bad guy does bad things, and that's it. But to sort of get that insight into why the Nath clan is so dominant and why they particularly want to keep their dominance, because at the end of the day they are taking taxation from the fields in Punjab and the villages in Punjab to run the business, and that is essentially where their main source of income comes from, by taking bhatta or taxation. Now in the formal way of the world, that's what we call it. So it was really fascinating to see that the character arcs were not just well developed for the star of the show but also the antagonist, and the antagonists weren't just one-dimensional characters who just wanted revenge or to kill people, but they did have a very deep motivation. They knew that in order to stay in power they had to showcase their dominance and kill whenever it was necessary and be strong enough to do that. I found it fascinating that the villain was somebody with principles, even though I personally may not agree with those principles, but I think it was showcased very fantastically. I think that Noori Nath saving his sister and then having his sister's back was also something that was beautifully done, and I think that particular item was a very modern take on Maula Jatt, because it had that element of like equality for women. It had that element of like a woman being in power, especially in her starting scene, if I'm not wrong, when she slays one of the people who are contesting for her brother's position, and after that we get introduced to Noori Nath. So that to me was really fascinating. And another theme of or tone of the movie was very dark. It was very I don't want to say Punjabi, but it did definitely have those elements of what a tribe looks like and how they think, how that family unit is united, how the tribe's name or reputation supersedes an individual, and that is essentially what gives strength to that particular tribe or leader. And that to me was very fascinating. I think it was able to break down that culture very well, and sort of like there was a lot of research done. I haven't seen the first Maula Jatt, so I'm not sure if that was something that they picked up from that or whether they were able to sort of understand the jirga system or the tribal system within like Punjab and sort of pull a bit of the interesting elements from that specific thing. So to me, the things that definitely stood out was the direction and the cinematography. The way that each scene was sort of stitched together, the way that the camera panned into their different villages. Like, whenever we would visit the Nuts, we would see that they are in a fort type of situation somewhere where, the camera is always zooming in like a drone, and the Nut clan resides on like, high sort of room, or like some sort of like wherever their bars were, etc. That was like at a very, very high place. So you could also sort of realize that, okay, where they stand in society at this point is very high, so like the equivalent of a skyscraper. And you see that power, like the height of a particular structure kind of donates power as well. So I felt like there was a lot of visual elements that the director was able to introduce, which we might not even think about while watching the movie, but just the showcasing of power, just the way that the village was structured. When we visit Maula Jatt's village, where he has been adopted and sort of taken in by his mom, we see that it's a flat village. We see that the people are very ordinary people. They don't have, like in one of the initial scenes we saw, that they don't have a spine. They don't have like the bravery to stand up to someone, even though they were outnumbered. They could have outnumbered the villain initially, one of the nut collectors of tax that initially came into the village. That's how much the fear was, and I think that taps into a very interesting psychological element in human behavior, where you kind of get to see that sometimes the enemy doesn't even need to be bigger than you, but you can just be scared and out of that not end up doing anything. So that was also a very, very interesting perspective, that the villagers were not brave enough, or they were too scared, or they associated their own safety above all else, and were willing to sort of deal with all the atrocities that the Nut clan was putting forth. The cinematography, I think, was also amazing. The way the camera angles were, the way that the whole production was ensured that the sets were designed, the lighting, everything. Even though some of the parts of the movie were dark, they were still beautifully done. Like, you could see, I think the costume design was insanely amazing. You could see from afar, if there was a Nut walking, you could see them dressed in black. Their lungis or dhottis were a particular fabric. I don't know the name of the fabric, but that's actually a very important fabric that is made in Punjab. I think it's called Susi, if I'm not wrong. And the way that the leaders of the Nut clan wore their dhottis, which had like a blue sort of lining in them, that sort of showed their royalty. Whereas Maula was just dressed mostly like a hobo. But that's also because he was a representation of a long lost sort of tribe. And we also saw that Maula's dresses, or the dresses of other people that interacted with Maula, were very simple. Maula still had that star sort of quality, but his clothes definitely were something of a have-been. And the costume design department, or whoever was in charge of it, was able to do this beautifully. The way that the scenes were shot in different parts, like even with the fight scene where there's usually a ring, the fighting ring, that itself, the way that the stands are made. And I think a lot of that was a very was very real from the culture that we're part of. The pehlwans that do fight, or even there is this thing where usually in these melas, in gaons, villages in Punjab, there is usually a ring, and nowadays there's like a motorcycle that sort of goes around, and it's called the death ring, or the ring of death. So that itself was a very fascinating detail that showed the reality of the culture sort of married into that movie. So for me, the pace of the movie was a bit slow, but I do think that they were masterfully utilizing that space to sort of showcase the locations, to showcase the real feel of the situation. So even when you went into the prison or when you went into the ghost town of the Jatts, we could see that the spaces were sort of also telling a story. And I think that not a lot of movies do that, but this one was able to do that specifically because it was a periodic piece set in, like, you know, Punjab in a few years ago, like a few decades ago. So that was a interesting thing for me particularly. I think the screenplay and the dialogue was written very well by Bilal Ashari and Nasir Adib, and I think Nasir Adib was the person who wrote the Punjabi dialogues, whereas the screenplay and the story and everything was written by Bilal Lashari. I think the dialogue delivery by most of the actors was very well done. I have seen a lot of hate for Maula Khan and her Punjabi, and yes, maybe there could have been somebody else playing Maira's role. I think her acting was fine, but her dialogue delivery wasn't at par of where it should be, because if you ever meet a Punjabi girl from a village, they are not that refined. They are very sassy and snazzy, and they have a very outspoken way of like dealing with things and situations. So we could see that from a screenwriter's point of view in the dialogues, but we could not maybe see that from Mahira being able to convey that through her body language or through her spoken word. The last thing that I will discuss is definitely the actors. I think everyone agrees that Hamza Ali Abbasi probably stole the show. To me, I think another person that stole the show was Humayma Malik. The way that she showcased her power as like maybe even the potential kingmaker, that to me was really amazing, because seeing a really powerful woman on cinema in today's day and age in Pakistan, I think that is amazing. Fawad Khan didn't have as many dialogues, but honestly his acting, most of his acting was being done through his eyes, you know, like half the time just his eyes like going up and down, like his eyebrows, everything, his facial expressions. I think that's why Fawad Khan is Fawad Khan, because even though with like maybe the least amount of dialogues, he was able to convey the rage, the feeling of loneliness, not knowing his past, having those conflicting thoughts, being a good person but knowing that killing is the way to go forward. All of that hero complex that usually, you know, heroes have, where they, in order to do the right thing or to avenge their father's or their family's death, they are that convinced that they are willing to throw the whole village into like jeopardy or whatever. So that I think was fascinating. I think Faris Shafi did a really nice, funny character. I've seen him before in Churels, and that character was very, very strong. But this one, as a friend of Maula Jatt, the balance was, I think, perfectly good. Ali Azmat, I didn't recognize him from the half of the movie, and then later on I realized that okay, this is Ali Azmat, and that I haven't seen him acting before, so that was also really cool. Yeah, and the rest of the characters, again, the youngest brother of the Nath clan, I think, again, like amazing. So I personally think that the Nath siblings, as twisted as they were, great actors, like to stand out as a villain in a movie that is centered on a hero's trauma and story, and being able to steal the show, I think that was really fascinating. So for Pakistani cinema, I think this is a very big win. I don't think we have seen something being produced on this scale. We haven't seen something being produced with this grandeur, and all the little details have sort of like fit in to make this movie really beautiful. Yes, there was a lot of gore, which was another criticism that I heard from a lot of people around me, but at the end of the day, it is a very, you know, desi Punjabi movie, and the original Maula Jatt and the movies of that time were even more gory, and I think it stayed true to that. So that's another interesting thing, and I hope that this movie is able to pave the way for a lot of high-end cinematic productions, and also sort of showcase to the world that Pakistan is not lacking behind in film industry anymore, and we are at par with international standards. And yeah, this was my review. Let me know what you think, and don't forget to leave in the comments below, did you see the movie? What were the things that could be better? What were the things that could be improved? And yeah, take care and have fun. Don't forget to like and subscribe.